the more food is processed, unless it's fortified, typically the fewer nutrients it contains. And as ultra-processed foods take up a larger and larger percent of the calories consumed in America, there's at least a dozen nutrients that we know as ultra-processed foods take up more calories, the intake of those nutrients goes down. It's a perfect correlation, and those foods just don't have the same nutritive value as whole foods. Deficiency is potentially a bigger problem than most people realize, but I think the more insidious thing to think about is insufficiency.
Dr. Sarah Ballantyne is a PhD and the founder of Nutrivore.com. She creates educational resources to help people improve their day-to-day diet and lifestyle choices, empowered and informed by the most current, evidence-based scientific research. Dr. Sarah began her career as a science communicator and health educator when she launched her original website in 2011. Since then, Dr. Sarah has continued to follow the science, diving deep into immune health, metabolic health, gut microbiome health, nutritional sciences, and the compelling evidence for health at any size, while also observing the harm of healthism, diet culture, dogmatic misinformation, and predatory marketing. With Nutrivore, Dr. Sarah has created a positive and inclusive approach to dietary guidance based in science and devoid of dogma, using nutrient density and sufficiency as the basic principles, nourishment, not judgment. All right. Well, welcome, Dr. Sarah Ballantyne. I am so excited to talk to you today about what you've been up to in the last couple of years since I last saw you, frankly, and you have a new book coming out. So I'm so excited to talk to you about that and all of your research.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I feel like it's been too long since we've had the opportunity to have a conversation. So I'm excited.
Yes. Well, let's dive in. I think we're both pretty much known as the autoimmune experts. You've written, many a book and, really coined the phrase, the AIP diet, the autoimmune protocol. And, both of our programs are very similar. And now you've moved into something, I don't want to spoil the punchline, you've moved into something actually it's there in your background, into Nutrivore. So why don't we just start kind of with your journey in general for those who maybe don't know you, and then, how you've made this, change or evolution into Nutrivore. And then we'll, of course, get into what that is.
So I to get like the way far back part of the story, what brought me into the wellness community in the first place was I have a background in medical research. I have a PhD in medical biophysics, and I was too sick to balance an academic career and a baby who was colicky and didn't sleep and had undiagnosed sensory processing disorder at the time. And so I took time off of doing medical research, and that gave me the space to start working on my own health. And it was a dozen different diagnosed health conditions and really trying to find what I could change in my own life to sort of take control and take back my health. That brought me to the paleo community, the autoimmune protocol, brought me to Dr. Terry Wall's work and really like getting very nerdy about what nutrients do in the body. And I've been a leader in that community for over 12 years. And I think two things were happening simultaneously over that time. So it was the science that brought me to this community in the first place. It was diet recommendations rooted in scientific studies that really like got my attention in the first place. And I was seeing the community like from the inside, right? Like as a leader, feeling like we're losing the plot a little bit and seeing more and more restrictive diet structures taking hold. And I think there's a natural like human psychology here. I think when you think of a diet in terms of what you're not eating and you hit the limits of what that diet can offer you health-wise, you want the next thing, whatever that is, the next 20 pounds to lose or the next symptom to resolve. I think there's a natural tendency to credit the things we're not eating for those health benefits rather than what we're eating in their place. And so if we think of a diet in terms of what we're cutting out, it becomes kind of like a natural psychology to go, okay, well, if I want the next thing health-wise, I just need to cut out more. And so that psychology was really taking hold. Fear-based marketing has really been taking hold, I think, as the social media algorithms have moved to rewarding outrage over the last 8 to 10 years or so. And so I started having conversations with people who were combining diets, combining protocols, cutting out more and more foods, and really like digging themselves into an even deeper health hole. Sort of from the outside, it's always easy for it to be obvious, right? Like it's always easier as an observer to say, well, where are your food sources of, list 10 different nutrients, and they're gone, right? We when we start restricting our diets that much, we're cutting out all food sources of really important nutrients that support biological systems. So at the same time as I'm sort of like the inside observer watching the entire community go more and more restrictive, a step away from the scientific evidence, my own research was bringing me into researching the gut microbiome. And that was eye-opening because I was working on a book it still has not seen the light of day. Hopefully it will be published at some point. But I really went into that research wanting to be as objective as possible and really wanting to leave all preconceived notions I had about what the merits of different foods at the door and really just understand how different foods and different food components impact the microbial community living in our digestive tracts. And that forced me to look at some foods that I had been avoiding, that I had been treating as bad foods, that are phenomenal for the gut microbiome. They increase gut microbial diversity, which is one of the most important things, most important features of a healthy gut microbiome. They feed these really important keystone species, right? These bacteria that help to shape the entire environment so the entire gut microbiome can be healthy. And I started to think, maybe I'm wrong. And maybe our community more broadly is wrong about some foods. And that was kind of the beginning of me challenging what I had sort of held as a fairly constant collection of beliefs around foods for a few years. And the more I researched, it was 7 years of research. So there's no one eureka moment here. These are all little bits of increasing information that are starting to challenge my beliefs around different foods. I also started working on expanding my diet. And initially I had a lot of fear around trying foods that I was worried that they would trigger autoimmune disease symptoms. And the fear around trying the food actually, I think, created a stress response around that experience and then made it really hard to interpret whether or not that food was working for me. But as I got deeper and deeper into expanding my diet, the thing I discovered is the only food I'm really intolerant to is gluten. And I had been avoiding a much longer list of foods than that. And as I expanded my diet, my health started to fall into place. Those lingering challenges that I just figured were more related to my stress level, or this is related to a genetic factor that I can't change. Everything started falling into place. And so my own experience of expanding my diet, increasing dietary diversity, increasing nutrient diversity, and then watching our community sort of swing that pendulum in a whole opposite direction, that is the origin story for Nutrivore. That is why I felt the need to build something that can help give us permission to add foods back in, that can help give us direction, even on a therapeutic protocol, even in the context of avoiding foods for medical reasons, give us a knowledge base that can help to inform choices so that we're not digging that nutrient hole, and instead we're understanding where our nutrients are coming from and making sure that our bodies do have all the nutritional resources that they need. So it's been a long journey. I started talking about non-paleo foods over 4 years ago, and rebranded to Nutrivore about 2 years ago. And it's been an incredibly rewarding journey because it aligns with my personal experience in a way that I think I didn't recognize for a long time how much disordered eating I really had within the community. I think it's very easy for us to say it's not disordered eating, it's healthy eating. But the relationship with food is not healthy, and that's what makes it disordered. And so there's been a huge personal health journey to sort of coincide with the education, looking at science in a different way, looking at it more rigorously, and then building those resources for other people to learn from.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll just jump in with a couple of comments. I definitely saw in my clinic those individuals that you're speaking of that just got more and more and more restrictive. And I do think that it's a common misconception for a lot of people on their healing journey to really think it's all about the food, right? I mean, there's so many things that both you and I talk about, that are toxins, stress, infections. There's so many other factors. And food, of course, is a big part and plays a big role, particularly as you already mentioned in connection with the microbiome and how important the gut microbiome is in all of this. But I definitely saw that time and time again, the people coming in, eating only, a handful of 10 foods. On the other end of that spectrum, in my book, The Autoimmune Solution, I talked about the autoimmune spectrum and how as you worked your way down the spectrum, you really could incorporate these other foods. And it was something that I really did, talk to my patients about, and something that, I personally, have done over the years. So, it's great to see some more evidence behind that. And we'll jump into that with your book. But, it's something that, rice and beans are not bad for everyone, particularly if you're cooking them properly, right? And you'll get into, how actually incredible some of these things can be for your microbiome and the fiber and all of the components. And so, those are things that over the years, as at least for myself, as my autoimmune markers are negative, I can add these things in. And then if I have something like, I had a mold exposure here in our new home. And so it's like, I've got to get really, for me personally, I found that that's when I have to really get back to, what I call the Myers way, what you previously called the autoimmune protocol. And then as, my health is established, I'm able to then branch out. And that's, one of the things that I generally tried to educate people on and finding those foods, because there may be some foods, whether it's one such as gluten to, there may be an array or a handful of foods that someone isn't able to tolerate. Well, let's jump in. So, I mean, you talk about, there are omnivores out there, they're, herbivores, they're carnivores, but you are now advocating for Nutrivore. So why don't you tell us first, kind of what you define as Nutrivore and why you think that that's so important?
So Nutrivore is very simple to define. It is the goal of getting all of the nutrients our bodies need from the foods we eat. That's it. That's all a Nutrivore is. Putting that into practice requires a knowledge base. So that is what I'm building with my book, Nutrivore. That's what I'm building on my website, Nutrivore.com. That's what I share across my social media channels, is the knowledge of what nutrients do in the body, what foods contain what nutrients, and how to combine different foods to get the full range of nutrients that our bodies need. So I think of Nutrivore as a food philosophy rather than a diet. There's no foods you have to avoid. There's no foods you have to eat. Instead, it's like that broad nutritional science education that it's ridiculous we don't have. Like, if you think about how much we know about math when we graduate high school, or how much we know about grammar when we graduate from high school, if we just had this like same kind of level of broad basic understanding, not a nutritional sciences, bachelor's degree that I'm going to build a career on, but just a general idea of like where I'm going to get what types of nutrients in my diet, that would protect us from predatory marketing and salacious health claims on the internet. That would allow us to adapt our diets to our access to different foods, our budgets, our taste preferences. It would allow us to prioritize cultural foods. And it would allow us to get more nutrition, right? Improve diet quality without necessarily having to restrict or feel deprived. And so Nutrivore, while the concept is very simple and very logical, it's as much about building that knowledge base so that somebody who has found great success with, for example, the Myers Way, and they want to continue with that dietary structure, Nutrivore is an emphasis that they can overlay on top of that in order to make sure that they're getting the full range of nutrients their bodies need, or identifying, hey, look, I actually have kind of all food sources of this nutrient that's really important, but also avoiding these foods is really important for me personally. Now I've identified an area where I need to supplement. So Nutrivore is that base knowledge that helps us reach this ultimate goal of actually meeting our nutritional needs from our diets.
And you talk about each food having a score, a Nutrivore score. How is this something that you came up with? And how did you, that, must have been an incredible amount of work
Yes.
how did you determine a particular food score? How did you go about,
So
figuring that
allow
out?
me to compress a year and a half's worth of work into
Sure.
a 3-minute answer.
Okay.
So for a long time in the wellness community, we've been saying, eat more nutrient-dense foods. And then you say, oh, what are those? We go, oh, it's like organ meat and vegetables and maybe shellfish, right? We kind of, we have this like explanation of what nutrient-dense foods are based on when we look at the list of percent daily values that food has per serving, and it looks impressive. So we call it nutrient-dense, but it's entirely based on like the feeling that this food is nutrient-dense, right? It's based on an instinct, and our instincts were right most of the time, but they weren't 100% correct. And so when I knew that Nutrivore was something that was very important for helping people improve diet quality, no matter where they are, like no matter what your starting point is, Nutrivore has like a baby step for you to take. Or if you're doing all the things, Nutrivore is a great knowledge base to help refine, right? So wherever you are, Nutrivore's got the next thing to focus on. I knew I needed a way to quantify nutrient density. I knew I needed a way to mathematically calculate it. So my first step was, I'm going to go through the science, all the papers that have been done. It's called nutrient profiling. It's the science of categorizing foods according to the nutrients they contain. There's a few dozen different nutrient density scores that have been developed. I'm going to read about every single one. I'm going to read all of these papers, and I'm going to pick the best one, and that's what I'm going to build Nutrivore off of. So after about 3 months of reading every single or just about every single paper in this entire field, that was like what I lived and breathed for 3 months. I went, these all are flawed. There's just these like logical problems in the calculation. So the best example I have is what a lot of these scores are trying to do is figure out what is the math that I need to do? What nutrients do I include in my calculation? How do I weight them? Like, what is the math? What is the algorithm so that the score that spits out aligns with the healthy eating index, which is a way of measuring how closely someone's diet follows the USDA dietary guidelines for Americans. Why are we doing it that way? Doesn't it make more sense to figure out how to best represent a food and then figure out if the dietary guidelines for Americans needs some adjusting? Why are we trying to retrofit a score to something that already updates every 5 years? It actually makes no logical sense. And then when you find out that the best way to have a nutrient density score align with the dietary guidelines for Americans is to include only 9 nutrients in the calculation, it gets all of my like suspicious like radar going. Right. I'm like, what? Then there's got to be a problem here. There's got to be something missing from the dietary guidelines for Americans that we could learn if we actually just objectively measured how many nutrients per calorie there is in foods, which is the definition of nutrient density from the World Health Organization. So after 3 months, I called up my team. We had a meeting. I was like, I'm gonna have to make my own. I didn't want to. It wasn't what I set out to do. Granted, there was the rhyming scheme of Nutrivore score right there, waiting for me. So that was awesome. So what I did was develop it. So algorithmically, it's related to the nutrient-rich foods index, which has one of the largest bodies of scientific literature in terms of nutrient density scores. But instead of using like 9 or 15 nutrients in the calculation, I used 33, which is basically every nutrient that I have a complete enough data set that it makes sense to incorporate it. And just then, do the math. That there was a lot of...
Sorry to interrupt. Did you manually go through and do this, or did you have
initially
any computer algorithm help? Or
So the first 300 scores I calculated by hand. I have stacks of paper where I, was getting all of the nutrient data. Because the other challenge here is it's surprising how many gaps there are in our knowledge about how much of certain nutrients there are in foods. So actually, like a huge part of this was not just using the USDA Food Central database as one of the more complete national databases, but then figuring out, okay, well, there's no polyphenol data in here. Well, there's Phenol Explorer, but that database also is fairly limited. So now I have to go find scientific studies that measure the polyphenols. So actually a huge part of this job was actually tracking down the data to fill in as many of those gaps as possible. So I calculated the first 300 by hand. And then a wonderful team member named Lisa came on and said, why are you doing this by hand? Which was a great question. It was because that's how I know how to do it, was the answer. Mm-hmm. And she actually automated and created we've got like 30 or 40 different Excel workbooks that all talk to each other that now automate the calculation, which is why there can be 8,000 scores in a searchable database on the website now. And the great thing about her doing that is we discovered the few places where I did something wrong in the math, moved a decimal point or transposed numbers. And so all of that has long since been corrected. All of the faulty original hand calculated scores are long gone. But yes, so now it is all done in a mostly automated way so that there's no mistakes. And at least Lisa gets the shout out for taking on that project.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you to you. I mean, I'm so appreciate you over the years of your extensive, research. It's one of the things that at least certainly I believe that you're known for is just, your incredible amount of research in all of your books. So thank you for that. So let's talk. What does the data show in terms of number of Americans, at least, that have a nutrient that are nutrient deficient? And then also you speak of in your book about the difference between nutrient deficiency and insufficiency. Yeah. So maybe you could start by defining those and tell us, what does the research show for us?
Yeah, this is where the statistics are really alarming. So nutrient deficiency refers to usual intake of a nutrient that is so low that it results in a disease of malnutrition. So think scurvy or rickets, right? Our intake of vitamin C or vitamin D is so low that we have, symptoms that are related to in scurvy, right? Vitamin C is important for collagen formation. So you have a lack of collagen formation, collagen degradation, and that's what's behind all of the bleeding gums and folding up teeth and all of the symptoms, the rashes, all the things we think about when we think about scurvy. So deficiency actually just refers to like a disease of malnutrition being the consequence. We think that that's not very common, but actually studies show that nearly a third of Americans have blood levels of nutrients so low that they are at risk for a disease of malnutrition resulting from deficiency. So it will just take one little thing to tip them over into scurvy or pellagra or beriberi or night blindness or iron deficiency anemia. So we're actually
probably getting worse. Probably getting worse as a society, right? With all the processed foods.
The more food is processed, unless it's fortified, typically the fewer nutrients it contains. And as ultra processed foods take up a larger and larger percent of the calories consumed in America, there's at least a dozen nutrients that we know as ultra processed foods take up more calories, the intake of those nutrients goes down. It's a perfect correlation. And the reason is those foods just don't have the same nutritive value as whole foods. So deficiency is potentially a bigger problem than most people realize. But I think the more insidious thing to think about is insufficiency. So insufficiency refers to that entire world of gray in between my intake of this nutrient is so low that it's causing a disease of malnutrition, and I'm actually getting what my body needs. That entire world of gray. So for vitamin C, the recommended dietary intake for adult females is 75 milligrams per day. For adult males, it's 90 milligrams per day. We can probably talk for weeks about whether or not that's actually sufficient, but you only need 10 milligrams per day to prevent scurvy. So insufficiency is between 10 and 75 milligrams per day for females, between 10 and 90 milligrams per day for males. And that impacts about half of the population. About half of us are in that weird gray, not getting enough vitamin C, but our gums are not bleeding. So insufficiency, the reason why it's a problem is that it drives chronic disease. So the easiest way to sort of think of this as if we think about nutrients as resources. So they are the raw materials that we are made up of, but they're also the things that are used up in all of the different chemical reactions of life. And that's why we have to continuously top up our nutrient stores from the foods we eat. So it's not just energy driving those reactions. There's materials that go into the reaction to make the things that make us. Actually, even the enzymes that drive those reactions, right, are made up of nutrients. Enzymes use nutrients as cofactors, meaning the nutrient needs to be there in order for that chemical reaction to happen. So when we're short of a nutrient or a collection of nutrients, it puts strain on the biochemical machinery that needs that nutrient. Now, that strain can cause a variety of different things, right? So it could slow down a chemical reaction. It could cause a slightly different pathway to take over where the end product is not as good. Or there's a byproduct made that maybe has some kind of toxic effects in the body. So there's all these little subtle ways, right? Our bodies are amazing. We adapt very, very well. So we have all these different adaptive pathways, but none of them are as good as the main pathway that is supposed to happen that needs all these nutritional resources. So that puts strain on the biological systems that need those nutrients in order to do their normal jobs. Think cardiovascular system, immune system, neurological system. It's not one-to-one. It's not, I need scurvy to make collagen, or I need vitamin C to make collagen. I can't make collagen, I have scurvy. Instead, that strain interacts with genetics and epigenetics, environmental exposures, our social and physical environments, our diet as a whole, whether or not we're eating too much sugar or saturated fat. It interacts with other health-related behaviors. Do we smoke? Are we living a sedentary lifestyle? Are we drinking alcohol? And then collectively, those are the things that increase risk for chronic disease and infectious disease. So just about everything that is not a pure genetic disease has a link to nutrient insufficiency. So nutrient insufficiencies increase risk, but they're not the only thing going into that increased risk. But they are a clear point of intervention. And we can dramatically sort of turn down the volume of our risk for these health problems. We can't turn it off, unfortunately, because humans have complex biology. But we can turn the risk way down by just making sure that we're supplying each biological system with the nutritional resources that system needs to function.
And so, obviously, I agree with you. We should be trying to get all of this from our food. When I was looking at the list of, the most nutrient-dense food, of course, it was things such as, pate, livers, anchovies, sardines, things that, maybe some people don't want to eat. You initially said, if they're foods that for whatever reason you don't want to eat, you can't tolerate them, maybe it's a religious thing, then you could at least hone in and know which nutrients you might be insufficient in, and I think alluded to supplementation. I noticed in the book you recommended, not taking a multivitamin, and that there were many studies showing that, you kind of can't supplement your way out. I guess my question to you is, well, I would be curious to know what type of multi they were using in those studies. Was it a one a day, found at Walmart, or was it a, pharmaceutical grade, that you and I are more familiar with bioavailable nutrients. But clearly, yes, we have always recommended getting our nutrients from food. But what do you say to the person who either, doesn't want to eat liver, doesn't want to eat pate, to the person who maybe has a sensitivity to a food, an allergy to a food, or a religious reason that they're not eating a food, and ways that they can either overcome that through other foods or through some supplementation?
Yeah. So I think there's two different parts to this question. I want to make sure I address both. So the first is the value of a multivitamin and that science. So we've got these huge meta-analyses now that have looked at multivitamin, multimineral supplement use and how that impacts the big health conditions, right? So cardiovascular disease risk and mortality, cancer disease risk and mortality, all-cause mortality, which is a general indicator of health and longevity. And there's no signal. There's no signal of benefit from taking a multivitamin. There was a big 2019 study that showed that they identified, I don't remember off the top of my head exactly which nutrients, but there's a collection of 5 or 6 nutrients that when you got those from food, but not a multivitamin, it reduced all-cause mortality. And they also identified getting too much calcium from supplements, but not from food, as being potentially something that could increase cancer incidence. With the exception of getting too much calcium from a multivitamin, it's really important to emphasize here that there's no signal of harm either. For somebody who is really struggling to afford higher quality food, the funds that you would put into a multivitamin supplement are probably that you're going to get more health benefit by putting those funds into food. As long as we're avoiding that like too much calcium part from taking supplements, if it's a nutritional like insurance that you want, there's no harm from that other than the money spent. And I will say there are also niche health challenges that look like they can be improved by a multivitamin use. So, for example, there's a lot of studies showing that like B complex supplements can improve cognition in the elderly. So it's not to say that there aren't situations where a multi-type supplement would be beneficial. And one of the things that you I think, rightly specified is what's the quality of this multivitamin? This is looking at all multivitamins. So this is asking the person, do you take a multi, yes or no? And it's not dividing by brands or pharmaceutical grade versus what you can get at the drugstore or the grocery store. And so we don't know. We just don't have the data, especially like these large population studies to say, well, if you are taking methylcobalamin instead of cyanocobalamin as a B12 form, is that better? Or, I mean, I would expect it to be better,
right?
But we just don't have the data to say for sure in these like multivitamin formulations. So I want to be clear that I'm not saying that a multivitamin is bad. Again, exception of getting too much calcium. But I do want to make sure that when we are making those challenging choices to fit a tight budget, I want people to know that their money is better spent on higher quality food, which is a very nice segue to the other like half of this answer, which is, yeah, but what if liver is disgusting and I don't want to eat it? The wonderful thing about Nutrivore and the like broader educational resources that I am creating is that we can look at the nutrition profile of liver and go, what are the other foods? Maybe I need to swap it out for not just one food, but maybe 2 or 3 foods where I can get those same nutrients. The most similar foods nutritionally to organ meat is shellfish, like the mollusks, like oysters, mussels, and clams. They have extremely similar nutrients with the addition of having the long-chain omega-3 fats, which are actually extra valuable, with the addition of having more ultra-trace minerals, and the addition of having like higher levels of zinc and selenium. So, shellfish like mollusks are pretty much a 1-for-1 trade. So if that's more accessible, if that's something that you enjoy flavor-wise, that's a great choice. But I will say you can absolutely meet your nutritional needs from the foods you eat without eating liver or shellfish. If those are both like, oh, no, gross, I don't like those, I don't want them. I don't want them in pill form. I don't want them in any form. It means that you're going to have to look for those other food sources. So maybe eggs are going to have to be a feature in order to get those B vitamins. You're going to have to like pick more whole foods. So the great thing about a food like liver is it's so nutrient dense, it buys us more wiggle room in our diets for choosing foods that don't offer a lot nutritionally, but just because we love them, we want them. And the more foods that we have in our diet that are these like nutrition superstar foods. So I would say, organ meat, fish and shellfish, vegetables, fruit, legumes, nuts and seeds, right? Like those foods that just are packed with nutrients per calorie. The more of those feature in our diet, the more a donut is going to make absolutely no difference. The more room there is for a food that has very little like essential nutrients and a lot of calories, because I met so much of my nutrient needs with so few calories with these other types of foods. So they're very valuable foods from a quality of life perspective because they earn us this room for foods that we just want. But that doesn't mean that we can't formulate a Nutrivore diet where we're meeting our nutritional needs without, like, we absolutely can. I want to be clear that I'm not using too many negatives to make this sentence confusing. We absolutely can put together a diet that does not include organ meat and meet our nutritional needs.
Yeah, let me ask you 2 things that came up for me in that answer are, one, you mentioned, the sort of shellfish and some of these oysters, they're bottom feeders. So what role does, finding, where can you find a clean source for oysters these days, right? So a lot of these,
Yeah.
so where does clean source and toxicity fall in, your Nutrivore score? And then secondly, you mentioned, taking a supplement, which is generally just freeze-dried liver and things like that. Is there any, I'm assuming this is very different than a multivitamin because it's the actual organ and it's freeze-dried, but how does taking a liver supplement compare to eating, sauteed liver at night? And is there any research on that?
Yeah.
Like, can you substitute them one for one, basically?
So we'll start with the last part of, because that's a really simple answer, which is yes. So freeze-dried liver, those nutrients are highly bioavailable. Better to take those pills with a meal so that you have all of that digestive processes going. The thing to know about like freeze-dried liver pill, for example, is the fresh equivalent. So it's pretty typical for the instructions on the bottle to be 4 or 6 pills per day. And it's pretty typical for that to add up throughout the week to about 2 or maybe 3 ounces fresh. So just understanding like how much liver am I actually getting by taking these pills every single day, that is the part that's like a little bit tricksy. In terms of the broader question of does the Nutrivore score account for things like contaminants? The answer is no, and that's because it is such a complex system where sourcing is it's so variable depending on where you live, what time of year it is, exactly what the source of these foods are. It's too complex of a system to be able to quantify mathematically with the data that we have, at least for now. But with shellfish as bottom feeders, I've got like so much great news because we have this visual of them as bottom feeders as that like being a gross thing. But what they actually do is they're filter feeders. So they pull in ocean or river water, depending if they're freshwater or saltwater. They pull it in, they filter out things like algae and microorganisms, plankton, and then they spit out what they're not eating. So that goes back out into the water. And studies have shown that shellfish have some of the lowest pollutant levels of any seafood because they're at the bottom of the food chain. The types of seafood that can accumulate pollutants, whether we're talking about microplastics or methyl mercury, are the sort of top predators in polluted waters. So even mercury in seafood is not a concern for most people. The reason for this is fascinating. So methyl mercury, the way that it harms us is methyl mercury binds irreversibly to selenium. So once methyl mercury and selenium get together, they're together for life. It's you need very fancy chemistry to be able to pull them apart, and that's kind of chemistry does not happen in biological systems. So we have 30-ish selenoenzymes. So these are enzymes in our body that have selenium, 1 to 4 selenium molecules as part of their molecular structure, where that selenium is important for that enzyme to actually do its job. And that includes a collection of really important antioxidant enzymes that protect the brain against oxidative damage. So when methylmercury binds with these selenoenzymes, it renders them inactive, so they can't do their job of protecting the brain from oxidative damage. Hence, all of the symptoms of mercury poisoning and why we have the phrase mad as a hatter, because it causes neurological damage. But in seafood, seafood is one of the best, other than Brazil nuts, is the best food source of selenium. So most fish have more selenium in their tissues than mercury they're exposed to in their aquatic environments, even through biomagnification. So that methylmercury is already bound to selenium in the fish, which means A, it's not very efficiently absorbed in our gastrointestinal tract, and B, it's already bound to selenium. It can't touch our selenoenzymes, and it actually makes it easier for our livers, which do have the capacity to detoxify some heavy metals to process and eliminate. So most fish have more, it's called the selenium health benefit value. It's a measurement of the ratio of selenium to mercury. So most fish have a positive selenium health benefit value, which means more selenium than mercury. And studies are showing that those are perfectly safe fish to consume. So the ones that are problematic are things like mako shark and pilot whale. Swordfish, the data is mixed. Some show positive, some show negative selenium health benefit value. So that's probably one not to eat too often, but once in a while is probably just fine. But all of those common ones that you can get at the store, tuna's perfectly safe, salmon's perfectly safe, trout's perfectly safe, tilapia's perfectly safe. Like all of the types of fish that you're going to get in most grocery stores all have positive selenium health benefit values.
So I'm certainly aware of the selenium and mercury connection. The interesting thing is, at least early on in my practice, I had this little card, and I think I even referenced it in my book, just about, the highest mercury containing fish, and, tuna and like Atlantic salmon are on there. Are you saying that that measurement is inaccurate? Are you saying that the research, that there's been further research and it's, saying that, that's outdated now and this is really the truth?
Yeah. So, I mean, what's fascinating about selenium health benefit value science is there has been, when I first started talking about this back in 2013, there was like 3 studies that were actually measuring it. It was a fairly new measurement. Now there's more studies than I could count. And what's fascinating is even there's part of its government programs now in their monitoring as well for fish safety. It's now included in a lot of government monitoring programs. So we even have data that's now specific to salmon that go to this estuary, and we know the selenium health benefit value of those versus these other salmon that go to this other estuary. So we do have a lot more data, and I think the thing that data has allowed us to do is to be a little bit more sophisticated than just looking at the mercury levels, because the mercury levels is certainly, still data we want, but it's just one part of the picture. We really need to know both the mercury and the selenium levels in that fish in order to be able to make a safety evaluation.
Mm-hmm. And also your own selenium levels, and then how well you methylate. I haven't eaten tuna in probably 15 years, literally not one single bite of tuna. So this might be good news for me because I actually really do like tuna, but it is a food that I emphatically avoid. Or if I'm out at a restaurant and the only available salmon is Atlantic salmon, I will just choose something else as well. So that's good news. So in your book, you talk about that there are 12 nutritionally distinct food families. Mm-hmm. Can we talk about that? And then I'd love to get into how we can actually plan a meal.
I would love to. So I call them the Nutrivore foundational foods. I want to emphasize right off the bat, it doesn't mean you have to eat them. These are 12 food families. I like the term family instead of group. It's just a little bit more granular. When we think of food groups, we're thinking about 4 or 5 different groups of foods. Food families, there's like 50 of them, right? So we're just, we're looking at more highly related foods. And so there's 12 what I call foundational food families. These are the ones that have something either unique to offer us nutritionally. So for example, cruciferous vegetables, the cabbage family, have this class of phytonutrients called glucosinolates. And it's glucosinolate metabolites that are responsible for the really strongly cancer protective benefits of cruciferous vegetables, but they also reduce risk of cardiovascular disease. They can improve insulin sensitivity, and some of them, not all of them, can reduce risk of neurodegenerative disease as well. So they earn foundational food status because they are the only foods in the world that have this class of phytonutrients. So the foundational foods are those foods that, if we make those a priority in our diets, I have suggested servings, either daily or weekly servings for each of them. When we make those a priority, that's how it's easiest to reach our nutritional needs. And that gets us the best coverage for these non-essential phytonutrients are non-essential, but still very important for long-term health outcomes. That gives us the best coverage of those types of nutrients. So the 12 foundational food families are vegetables in general, cruciferous vegetables, alliums, which is the onion family, mushrooms, root vegetables, and leafy vegetables. And then all of those kinds of vegetables count towards total vegetables as well. Mm-hmm. And then fruit in general, citrus fruits, berries, nuts and seeds, legumes, and we're really specifically calling them pulse legumes because fresh legumes get categorized over there as vegetables, and seafood. I recognize seafood allergies are very common. Nut allergies are very common. So what we would do is to say, what is the thing in seafood that elevates it to foundational food status? We would say it's the long chain omega-3s. They're also incredibly nutrient dense. There's lots of other great things that they have, but it's the long chain omega-3 fats, docosahexaenoic acid and icosahexaenoic acid, DHA and EPA, that are the special thing that these have. If I can't eat those, where can I get those? And that might be the time to look at sea vegetables, algae, or an algal oil supplement as a source for those long chain omega-3 fats. So again, sort of using that as an example to say, these foods are, when we eat a variety from these 12 families, that helps us meet our nutritional needs the best and gives us that full range of nutrients that our bodies need. But they're also the simplest way to think of foods in terms of figuring out what nutrient shortfalls we might have that can be addressed either through a specific food focus, like eating more sea vegetables or purslane as a random vegetable on land that has long chain omega-3 fats. So either through a specific food focus or through a supplementation strategy.
So interesting. I didn't hear you mention any type of animal protein other than seafood in there.
Other than seafood. Yeah. So again, thank you for asking, because I think the other thing to emphasize here is this is not the only foods you eat on Nutrivore. So these are what I call them foundational, again, because they supply this full range of micronutrients. And the reason why seafood makes it, but other animal foods don't, is because of the incredible range of micronutrients that seafood has and the long-term health benefits that eating fish and shellfish regularly delivers, that we don't see the same type of signal of benefit from red meat or poultry. We see those being a little bit more health neutral. But that doesn't mean that red meat and poultry are avoided on Nutrivore. They are the foods that fill in the rest of the diet. So if you meet your serving targets of all 12 foundational foods, depending on exactly what you choose, it adds up to somewhere between like 300 and 600 calories per day. So it's a fairly small fraction of the overall diet. And so from there, then we get to basically choose whatever else makes sense to us to round out our diets. And certainly in terms of protein needs, that's where meat would fit in.
And so are we looking for a particular score, or what I noticed in the book that I really liked, and I have a copy right here. There's a nice little checklist that you had of boxes that had, it looked like per serving, that you were trying to get X number of servings for fruits, X number of servings for vegetables. So, I mean, you really, there you go. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So can you walk us through that? What does an ideal plate look like? What are we shooting for? And is there a Nutrivore score that we're shooting for in a given day, or is it more back to that of number of servings?
These graphic tools are two different tools. So one I call the Nutrivore meal map. It's you can tell it's not a secret. It's definitely a modification of my plate. I'm not. It's too obvious to pretend that that's not the case. But that is a very simple way of crafting a balanced nutrient-dense meal without having to get into like the nitty-gritty of the Nutrivore score. So for the Nutrivore meal map, you roughly, we're not doing any like weighing or measuring or counting here. We're using approximations and visual approximations here. So very roughly divide your plate into 4 quarters. 1 quarter is a starchy food. So that could be a root vegetable. It could be a legume. It could be a grain, preferably whole. 1 quarter is a protein food. So that could be, seafood or meat or dairy products or broth or eggs or a plant protein. And then the remaining half of the plate is a variety of fruits and vegetables, ideally at least 2 different ones to be able to get that fruit and vegetable variety, which is why we still think about it in terms of quarters. When we do that and we focus on whole foods and we focus on mixing it up, that typically will get us 80 to 90% of the way to a like nutrient replete diet, just by sort of thinking about the overall eating patterns. The other part of this visual with the checklist is the Nutrivore weekly serving matrix, which is like the next level, right? So like once we're kind of forming our plates this way, we're kind of used to like that overall balance, the next level is keeping track of the Nutrivore foundational foods. And that's what the Nutrivore Weekly Serving Matrix does. And it gives us serving targets that we can absolutely work up to. We don't have to go all in on day one, right? We can use it to track progress. And so that is about keeping track of those, vegetables, fruit, legumes, nuts and seeds, seafood, and then all the different vegetable and fruit families that make it as Nutrivore foundational foods. And then incorporated is keeping track of dietary diversity and eating the rainbow as well as really important long-term eating patterns. And there's also a bonus section where, organ meat does show up. So there is also a way to get that wonderful extra credit for those nutrient-dense foods. So in the book, it's a 3-4 page graphic. There's also a cheat sheet to eyeball serving sizes, so we don't need to get into that measuring, tracking thing. And so it's a resource for the practical implementation of Nutrivore. I feel like there's Nutrivore score of the day. I was I know there's another part of this question. So a score around 150 to 165 kind of depends on exactly what your caloric requirements are and what biological sex and life stage you're at. If you have that's what it would work out if you got 100% of the daily value of all 33 nutrients that go into that score. That would be what would be the perfect score of the day. In practice, you're always going to go over on some nutrients, right? You're always going to go over on those B vitamins in order to get to the daily value of some of those minerals. There's certain nutrients that are just easier to get from foods. Vitamin B5 is in everything. We don't have to work very hard to get vitamin B5. But we do have to work harder to get enough magnesium and potassium and calcium. Mm-hmm. So in practice, a Nutrivore score of the day that would make sure that we're getting all of the nutrients we need is probably double-ish that. So it's probably 300-ish. It's a tool that I have not yet had the resources to create to help people calculate their Nutrivore score of the day. But algorithmically, what you would do is you would take, and you could do this back of the envelope math-wise, you would take the Nutrivore score of the foods that you're eating and multiply it by how many calories worth you ate of that food, and then divide by how many calories you ate in the whole day. And then you would add that up for every food you ate in the day, and that would give you your Nutrivore score of the day. Somewhere, I would say probably 250 to 300 is probably a really good Nutrivore score to shoot for. But also, hang out. I'm pretty sure that'll be a resource that will exist in a much more user-friendly way in the not too crazy distant future.
Yes, I foresee an app in your future. And if you don't have the resources, you need a donate button on your website. Donate to the app so that people are not manually doing that.
Well, I would say come and join my Patreon. That is the best way to show support for future projects.
Where do calories fit into the Nutrivore diet or the Nutrivore plan?
In a very abstract way. So on Nutrivore, we want to choose foods such that all of the nutrients those foods contain add up throughout the day to meet or safely exceed our body's nutritional requirements while staying within our caloric requirements. So that is the caveat where calories come in, that we want to be choosing foods that help us get those nutrients without shooting us way over how many calories we actually need in the day. So it is part of the calculation of the Nutrivore score. That is a measurement of total nutrients per calorie. So that gives us a sense of the quality of calories in a food. But Nutrivore is as much about learning how to eat intuitively without tracking calories. Obviously, there are certain people who still need to. It's not incompatible with tracking calories, but Nutrivore is much more about understanding what a high quality diet looks like without having to get in the weed of I'm tracking calories or protein grams or carb grams, fiber grams, and kind of gets us away from that, I think, kind of obsessive mindset that diet culture has taught many of us, that very weight loss centered mindset. You absolutely can use Nutrivore to lose weight, but that's not the primary goal. The primary goal is long-term health. So calories they come into the math, and we certainly have that caveat that we want to meet our nutritional needs without exceeding our caloric requirements. But most of the time, we're not really worried about it.
Yeah, I mean, one can assume if you're eating more nutrient dense foods that you're getting fuller, you're getting what your body needs, and perhaps not having food cravings because, you actually have the amount of magnesium or, whatever you need that might otherwise be the underlying cause for those cravings. So tell us, like, what does Sarah Ballantyne eat in a day?
Oh my gosh. I think the most interesting part of answering that question is that my days look so different day to day. It's really hard to say I have a go-to breakfast because I probably rotate between 8 to 10 different breakfasts. But I will tell you, so my top priorities. So I hike 4 miles every morning and I power lift also 3 hours a week. So I do put a lot of effort into meeting protein goals to support that very, very high level of activity. So I make sure that there's a quality protein and at least 30 to 40 grams of protein at every single one of my meals. So my meals kind of start with what is my protein source? And then I always add a slow burning carbohydrate. So that might be a piece of fruit. It might be some, gluten-free whole grain bread, or it might be, a root vegetable, depending on the meal and depending what's convenient. And then I eat non-starchy vegetables like they're going out of style. So I have a history of being obese and losing weight many times because yo-yo. I'm sure I'm not alone in that one. So volume eating has been a strategy for me that's been very important. And the great thing about that with Nutrivore is it's all of those vegetables that are so important for long-term health, right? So the less calorically dense vegetables. So for example, I tend to eat, a large salad every single day. I love raw vegetable sticks and either hummus or guacamole. I have vegetables at every single meal. I definitely eat a couple of pieces of fruit per day. So I would say my meals look very much like the Nutrivore meal map. Even breakfast, I think one of the great things about coming from the AIP community is that I got very used to non-traditional breakfasts. Mm-hmm. I still love soup for breakfast. It's still my favorite breakfast is a good chicken vegetable soup. But the other thing I do is I mix it up. So whatever protein I had at that meal yesterday, I probably won't circle back to that protein for at least a week, if not 2. So dietary diversity is also a really big priority for me. So I even when I'm grocery shopping, will gravitate to what did I not buy last week? What is the thing that's different than last week? And I will also tend to buy what I call it one of each shopping. So instead of buying 2 pounds of green beans, that would be enough to feed my family with 2 teenage girls for one dinner. I will buy maybe half a pound of green beans and 1 crown of broccoli. And I always have carrots on hand, bulk carrots. And then I will mix all of those together. And I tend to combine things with similar cooking times that tend to cook kind of in the same way. But even when I'm serving a side dish, they tend to have 2, 3, 5 different ingredients. So dietary diversity is a really huge priority for me. And I think because of that, the types of foods that I'm eating varies more day to day than it ever has at any point in my life.
Do you have a 2-week meal plan written out, or are you been doing this for, even though your book's just coming out, we know how long it takes to get a book published. So you've been living your life this way, for several years now. Do you just have this routine and you have a general sense of things and you're able to kind of wing it at this point?
Yeah. So the secret is I've always been terrible at meal planning. That meal planning has never been a skill that I have been particularly good at. So the way that I get around that is I have a freezer with frozen vegetables, seafood, meat that I can basically shop the freezer every single day. What are we going to have for dinner tonight? And I have a vegetable garden, which is wonderful for eating seasonally, eating fresh. So I can usually, between those 2 things, I can usually round out a meal. And then we have certain things that are like on the grocery list every single week. So when carrots are not in my backyard, carrots are something that would be like every single week we're getting a bulk bag of carrots. Bananas would be on that list, pretty much every week. There's certain foods that we do have in the house all of the time. And I tend to cook pretty simple meals. So one of the benefits that I have working from home is that meals can be something that goes in the oven for a long time or simmers on the stovetop for a long time, but doesn't require a lot of hands-on time. So those are the types of meals I gravitate towards. So I love roasted whole chickens because it takes me all of like 3 minutes to pull it out of the package, throw it on the roasting pan, sprinkle some seasoning on it and throw it in the oven. But maybe it's a 7-pound chicken and it's going to take over 2 hours to roast. Those are the types of meals that I go for because I love leftovers. I love being able to rely, maybe I have that chicken for 3 nights, but then I'll mix up the vegetables each night. So I have always been somebody who wings it in the kitchen and has a really hard time making a plan and following the plan and execute on that plan. So meal planning is something that doesn't work very well for me just because it's not my skill sets. I have lots of skills. Meal planning is just not one of them.
I know, me either. And the irony is like we've written books and cookbooks with meal plans in them, but it's the irony.
Struggle
like,
so much. Yeah.
I know. I'm like, I couldn't follow my own plan, but the plan is there for the people who need it. But I did recently get into meal planning and I have a whiteboard and I was doing it and I was like, oh, this is great. I'm going to do the baked chicken. I was over here laughing sort of as you were talking about your baked chicken because my daughter Elle, who's now 7, loves a baked chicken. So it's perfect. We'll do the baked chicken the first night. Then, we're going to do this, paleo gumbo and use the chicken. And after about 3 weeks, she's like, yeah, I don't like baked chickens anymore. So, I have the problem of she likes something and within at least a month, it's sort of like, no, I don't like that anymore. So it's just like,
so I will tell you what I do have that is probably the closest thing to meal planning. I have a magnetic pad on my fridge that I have a list of all the meals that I haven't made in a while. Mm-hmm. And then I've been crossing them off as we make them. So I realized we really like, it's not an authentic version, but I make a version of mushu pork. And I was like, oh man, I haven't made that in a few months. So I had, we'll write down mushu pork. And it's like, I haven't made tourtière, which is a French Canadian meat pie that was a staple for me growing up. I haven't made that in a while. So I still haven't made that one. So that one's still on the list. And so periodically what I will do is I will sit and brainstorm meals that I know that everyone likes because kids are like that. Mine are 17 and 14 now. Wow. And definitely I think we're through like most things most people in the house like, or at least will still eat, even if it's not their favorite. So I think we're kind of through that picky kid phase for the most part. So I have this list of like things that we haven't had in a while. And what that does is if I know there's something I need to have in my freezer to make one of those meals next time I'm at the grocery store, I'm like, I'll make sure to go pick that up so that I have it as an option. And then when I get to it's lunchtime, I need to start thinking about what am I going to pull out of the freezer. It gives me this sort of like list of inspiration of, like here's a go-to recipe that we haven't had in a while. Do I have everything for this? Yep, great. Or maybe I need to text my husband and ask him to quickly run into the grocery store and grab something on his way home. He does not like it when I do that, by the way, so I try not to. It's not his favorite task. But that way I also I have this list of meal inspirations that also help I'm not always burdened with having to be creative in the moment. Mm-hmm. Instead, I can kind of look at this list and go, oh yeah, there's something that I haven't made in a while. That would be great. And then we have certain things that always go together. So when I make a roast chicken, always the last night of soup, right? There's certain things that I always know if I'm going to roast a chicken, we're going to have that for, depending on how big it is, for 2 or 3 nights. And then the 3rd or 4th night will be chicken something soup. And it might be an Italian chicken rice soup, or it might be a straight up chicken vegetable soup, or maybe I'll make a minestrone with the leftover chicken. That part will shift. But then there's always, there's certain ways that I reinvent leftovers that are pretty constant, which also takes the burden of creativity off because I just know, okay, this is the meal and here's the flow afterwards.
Right. I was just hoping to get into one of those, right? And then life gets in the way, somebody gets sick, not necessarily in our house, but, I have some help that helps. It's just something always, or vacation, or it's spring break, or, you just start to get in the groove and thinking, I've got this down. I've got this list. We're doing these meals. This is so incredible. And then, is
it in the groove something that actually exists? I think is
no,
the
not when you have
question.
Not when you have children that are ever evolving and changing. That is for sure. So going with the flow. And so for your meats and your seafoods and things like that, are you shopping locally where you live? Are you doing any of these online, that are touting as organic or more sustainable or things like that? Or are you really just shopping locally where you live?
Yeah, so it's a mix. So I love my Butcher Box, my Thrive Market. I mean, I'm sure Jeff Bezos doesn't actually need my money, but Amazon is also very convenient. What can I say? Fullyhealthy.com. Like I've got my go-to online vendors, especially for specialty ingredients that I still use and love. And then I'm really lucky to be in an area where there's one of every single grocery store close to me. So I have a Whole Foods pretty close. I have a Trader Joe's pretty close. I have a Sprouts and a Kroger and a Publix. There's a farmer's market. So I tend to go to one place each week in person. And then that's sort of I'll get whatever, if it's Whole Foods and there's Whole Foods specific things, I will get enough for the month that it might be before I go back to Whole Foods. And then next week, maybe it'll be Kroger. And again, there'll be the Kroger specific things that I stock up on while I'm there. So I would say my shopping's probably 70% local and 30% online. But I just pulled those numbers out of the place you don't normally pull things out of. So that's what kind of my gut instinct is. It's probably about 70-30.
Well, this has been great. And, congratulations. Your book is on sale May 14th. You have a new website. Tell us how people can find you.
Yeah. So the website is Nutrivore.com. If you go in the top right corner, there's a button in the menu called Join. So when you hit Join, that's where you can see my email newsletter. And I give 5 free guides when you sign up for my newsletter. So those are super valuable. Come get them. That's where you can link to my social media. That's where you can link to my Patreon. And then on the left-hand side, that's where you can hit the button, the Learn, and learn more about Nutrivore, learn about nutrients, learn about foods, what nutrients they contain. We're working on some new corners of the site that will hopefully launch in the next month or two. So maybe, depending on when you're listening to this, maybe you can go learn about what nutrients are linked to your health conditions. That is coming. If not, it's in the book. So definitely go check out the book because all of that information is already in there. So the website is a super in-depth resource. So we've been building this for a few years. It will be many years before I feel like it's complete. The plans for this go on and on and on forever. But one of the things my team and I are doing is we are putting together information that currently doesn't exist on the internet. So we are writing, for example, articles about every single way a nutrient interacts with our health, right? So every condition not getting enough of that nutrient impacts, or how much getting too much of that nutrient, what that might do. All of the foods that are the best sources of that nutrient. We're writing these articles in a way that's been really challenging because nothing like this exists on the internet for the average person. We're putting together nutrition facts that are far more detailed than you're going to find on any other website. So we are spending a lot of time doing basic research, combing through the scientific literature to be able to pull these resources together. Even just the daily values. There's you just click on, from the homepage, you click on daily values. You can go find your demographic group and figure out what your requirements are for different essential nutrients. Even that was a huge challenge to put together because it's not organized in a way that is actually accessible for most people anywhere on the internet. So we had to do it for the first time. It is an amazing honor and privilege to be building something that can help so many people, that is such a basic, fundamental nutritional resource, and be building that for the first time. I don't know why it doesn't already exist, but I feel privileged to be the person to be building it and leading it.
And I am predicting big things for you and Nutrivore, one of those things that people are talking about, decades to come. So congratulations.
I hope so.
So excited for you and proud of you. And as we part ways, I like to ask each of my guests 3 things that our listeners can do to take back their health.
Oh, that's such a great question. So I will share, why don't I share the 3 things that are the most important for my physical and mental health? So first is nutrition. I feel like that's sort of like that's a gimme. But one of the things that's been really important for me nutrition wise is challenging my own fears around foods and really being able to move past them. So when I say that nutrition's been really important, a huge part of that is also my relationship with food and really addressing disordered eating patterns with professional help. So I would say that's one is not just the food, but like the relationship with food. Ideally, we would not have a relationship with food. Like, I think it's weird that we say relationship with food. The second is sleep on a consistent schedule and a consistent basis. Getting more sleep, not only does it have all of its own benefits, but it also makes the food part so much easier. And then the third for me is I start every morning in the woods with my dog, unplugged for a 3 to 4 mile hike. And that time it holds me together. It is my most important time to just be in my own head, decompress. It's amazing creative time. I get so many ideas out there. And so many amazing nature encounters, and just the world is beautiful. And then it's also my activity. So it's my nature time, it's my activity time, it's my unplugged time. So, I carve out, I didn't start at 4 miles. I worked up to that when I had a puppy 4 years ago. So whatever you can carve out as that type of unplugged time, I cannot tell you how transformative being able to fit that into my routine has been.
Mm-hmm. And nature in and of itself. So, well, yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Sarah Ballantyne. Everybody go out, pick up a copy of her new book, Nutrivore. And like I said, I am predicting really big things for you. So thanks for everything that you do for us in the world. We appreciate you.
Thank you again for having me.
I want to thank this week's guests for sharing their time and knowledge, and thank you for listening. To read the full show notes for each episode, which include a summary, timestamp, quotes, and any resources mentioned, please visit amymyersmd.com/podcast. Lastly, if you've enjoyed this episode, I'd love if you would leave a rating and a review on Apple or Spotify, and we'll select a few to read out loud in a future episode. Tune in next week to hear from another inspiring guest as we help you take back your health.